Hello and welcome to today's episode of the GTM Playroom. My name is Ben Carden and I'll be your host for today. Today I've got a very exciting guest of Robert Koehler today. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's great to be here.
Well, for those of you who don't know who Robert is, Robert spent his entire career answering pretty much one question, right? Why do some revenue teams scale cleanly while others seem to kind of drown in chaos? Robert is a GTM advisor at Scale Venture Partners, where you help early stage startups turn revenue chaos into a bit of clarity. From my understanding, you take founders who are currently have very kind of messy founder-led systems, and you help them build repeatable, predictable kind of go-to-market systems independent of the founder. Before Scale Venture, you were at Topo, the go-to-market research firm that, from my understanding, wrote the playbook on modern sales and marketing alignment, and you were also at Compass. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I've enjoyed our conversations in the past, and looking forward into talking about scaling revenue and other topics today.
Awesome. So the first question for today is, you obviously worked at Topo. It's Topo, isn't it?
Yes,
Um,
Topo.
Topo. They effectively codified the modern sales and marketing playbook, right? In terms of the alignment between those two functions. From your perspective, how much of that playbook is still relevant today in 2026? And how much do you think founders are potentially paying consultants to implement a system that is no longer relevant?
I think there are frameworks, Ben, that are still very relevant. And I'll give you, for instance, I look at the go-to-market framework and I sort of view it as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And your air, your food, your water is the base layer, which is who is your target customer, your ideal customer profile. And then you need to layer on top of that. The next layer starts to get into things like messaging. And then as you go up further up the pyramid, you get into sales process and then how you're actually executing and enablement on top of that. And I think there's the frameworks and starting with the ICP is even more relevant in today's AI age. There are elements of the playbook, such as elements of the SDR playbook around research that are very obsolete in the age of AI. So the tactics really changed, but I think some of the strategy and the frameworks is absolutely still there.
Really interesting, Robert. Can you walk us through, some of the work that you might be doing with one of your clients and specifically how you actually took these playbooks and applied it to their kind of situation? So walk us through what the kind of core challenge was, how you took that playbook and applied it to their situation to kind of drive a real outcome.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of an AI company that I worked with. And it was a founder. They had two sellers. They're looking to bring in a head of sales full time. So they brought me on as a fractional resource to help start building some of the systems and scales for the sales team. And then also interview and be involved in bringing on that new VP of sales. And the first thing that I did with them is said, let's take a step back and look at the ICP. And in their case, Ben, they had enough customers and they had been selling long enough to do that. And when we started looking at the ICP, that really started to change and make the focus much more tangible. And we were looking at a smaller number of accounts, and that started to impact some of the messaging in terms of the sellers had to get really strong on those case studies and use cases. And it also started to change the sales process because, for instance, one of the things that they were suffering from was about a 15% close on their pilots, and they were doing tons of pilots. By
Wow.
by really focusing on the ICP and deciding, hey, there are a small number of accounts that have large potential that we can treat more as an ISV partner, almost a channel partner play. Let's separate those out, and we're going to do a separate pilot motion for them. But let's really focus on this, our core ICP. Let's start doing some marketing and SDR outreach to those core accounts. Let's have the sellers get really tip top on the use cases and the messaging for those accounts. And let's do a very abbreviated 14-day pilot max. And after that, it's a paid pilot going forward. And their pilot conversion rates went up to about 40%. And that's just a
Wow,
small sliver of an example.
interesting. I want to kind of dive into ICP there. There's so much talk around ICP. There's so much talk around ICP and how you probably define it from, and there are the kind of two key angles you can come at it from. One is the firmographic components, right? Type of industry, number of employees, revenue, geography, things like this. And there are other more philosophical or perhaps existential ways of defining an ICP, like, we work with companies that are looking to, grow their business. We work with companies who see things differently. How do you think about defining ICP? Do you think it's one or the other, or it's a combination of both of those variables?
I think if it more of it the former to answer your question directly, let me back up there, Ben, and give you my definition of the ideal customer profile. It's those accounts with the highest probability to buy with the least amount of friction that are can provide the most lifetime value, meaning that they're not going to churn, that they're good customers, they're going to stay with us if we treat them right and we do the right things. That's the ICP. And then I'm in the camp of you need to make the ICP as objective as possible because I've seen a lot of ICPs where I've talked to a founder. It's like, what's your ICP? Well, anyone that's in the market for this type of solution.
Mm,
How do you determine that objectively? So what the first approach I'll do is it's not just firmographic. There's a bunch of behavioral aspects and jobs to be done. They are trying to do X, Y, or Z. They are trying to give an example. They are trying to. Sorry, I'm blanking for a moment, but they are trying to. Let's say they're trying to grow their pipeline and they're hiring SDRs. They've got to do that. Whatever the job is to be done, that along with firmographics and actually the firm objective criteria that are most tied to the most effective ICPs is actually technographic, I find.
mm,
Is what are they using today? Now that is going to get more challenging in the age of AI. But what I'm trying to
mm.
stake out, Ben, is that once we've done our ICP, we should be in the monastery able to tie back every ICP attribute to some data source and have an objective way
Mm,
of looking at that. If we
mm,
can't do that, I find it's generally pretty fluffy. Because at
mm.
the end of the day, where the rubber really hits the road is we need to come up with a specific number of accounts, or excuse me, a specific list of accounts that we believe matches the ICP.
Okay. So what are those, all of the components of the ICP? You mentioned technographic, behavioral, and what is the data source which should reinforce that component?
It really depends. It may be firmograph. In the old days, it was Hoover's or D&B to go at it
Mm,
from 40 years ago. Today, it might be Zoom or whatever data source they're using. There's a lot of data sources out there for the firmographic components, whether it's number of employees, whether you want to try to go on revenue, I had one company that I worked with in the robotics field. It was based on number of warehouses in the U.S. So there's a number of data sets that you can do for that. For other things, like what AI has enabled for a lot of companies around the ICP is they are hiring for a head of revenue operations, or they're hiring a new warehouse distribution manager. And now you can go through and you can search through LinkedIn or Indeed or some of the other job sites, for example, to find those. And then there's data sources that are less data sources per se, but I've worked with a couple of clients where we really we wanted thought leaders. Now that's a
mm,
pretty, how do you define a thought leader? And what we came up with is a thought leader is someone who's speaking at one of these two major conferences.
mm.
and we looked at all the sponsors of those conferences and all the speakers over the last 2 years, and started to build that in as one of the attributes to the ICP.
I see. I see. So I suppose if we have these kind of behavioral components, we can actually always use data to kind of reinforce that. So a thought leader, which is a very kind of ambiguous term, you can actually write, okay, how do we define what a thought leader is? Well, perhaps it's someone who speaks at a conference more than twice a year. You could very quickly use AI agents to find all the people who fit the firmographic components and then who speak at these events. Is that correct in thinking that?
Absolutely, and and that's that can be part of the classic crossing the chasm signal of I'm
Mm,
looking for innovators and early adopters, and then so we're defining it a little bit more tangibly and objectively in that example.
I see. I see. Really interesting. We could probably spend all day talking about the ICP, but let's keep it a bit broader for today. Robert, walk us through your ideal customer that you work with, and what are some of the core constraints that they have to scaling their revenue?
The ideal customer that I'm working with is what I'll call a startup. It's typically somewhere between 3 to 50 million in revenue. And that's for my go-to-market advisory work. So if I think of my work as a portfolio, I have a couple of different portfolios. And for my go-to-market advisory work, and I do a lot of work with scale venture partners, and they have over 55 portfolio companies. That sweet spot is really about 3 million to 50 million. I have a couple of edge cases that are 100 million, or one company with scale of over 500 million, that are typically have a sales team of 10 or less, and they're trying to go from random ad hoc sales events, or in many cases from founder led selling to we need to get a sales team in place.
Mm. And would love to understand the journey of a client that you've worked with in terms of, a client who, was that founder-led sales. They didn't have any repeatable system or playbook. What is the kind of core outcome that you drove? Was it the implementation of this process? Was it a revenue number that you hit? What does that actually look like? And how do you kind of define success here?
One, it looks like let's put the framework in place. I can go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because we need to start there. What is the ICP? Do we have the ICP nailed? And the ironic thing is that if you ask companies, have you done work on the ICP and do you have a ICP? The answer is almost always yes. If you
Mm,
ask them if they have a good ICP, the answer is often yes. And the reality is, most times they haven't really thought it through.
mm,
In particular, if you only have a handful of customers, you've got to make some educated bets. But in that case, you got to plant a stake in the ground. So, looking at the ICP, looking at the messaging,
mm.
looking at where they are with operations, where are they with their sales process, and then we can work on if we've got the strategy in place, we've got the right market fit, we've got the right messaging, then we can start to work on ramping up sales skills, and only then can we start working on scaling up sales skills. At the end of the day, what does it look like? There's a lot of different ways I could answer that question. In the old days, it was a playbook. And the reality is that would document here's the ICP, here's the value prop, here's the messaging, here are the outreach cadences, here's the sales process. Nobody looks at sales playbooks. I developed a lot of playbooks early days for Topo, and they were gold. And the reality was they were more for the sales executives than they were for the sellers, and that's been true for a long time. Today, it looks like small clips, one thing at a time. ICP messaging. Are we nailed down on the messaging? Are we nailed down on the value prop for different personas? And then we can test that in enablement land through exciting things like AI sales simulation.
Mm.
Did I answer your question, Ben?
Yeah, no, it's good to understand what that looks like. Perhaps a step further, I'd probably ask two questions in one is like, what does that outcome look like? Are CEOs where founders assessing the quality of your work based off of revenue created, pipeline created? Or do you say, no, 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 we haven't had time to create pipeline yet, but look at this process and the system that we've built out? It's almost like a chicken and egg scenario, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I wish more times we could come out and say, yes, it was X amount of dollars revenue generated. But and sometimes we have easier markers like, hey, pilot conversion rate, which we can test
Mm,
pretty quickly if we don't have a 3 month pilot rate. I mean, industry benchmark should be 60% or higher. I would argue on pilots. We can start to look at that pretty quickly. We can start to look at the forecast of what that looks like and is that healthy. We can also start to, in addition to the forecast, we can look at the quality of the opportunities. In SDR land, you typically can start to see some things, as you know, through A/B testing and other means more
mm,
quickly than you can with an account executive team that might take 6 months, 12 months. I mean, if you have a 12-month sales cycle or 12-month sales cycle, you've really got to start looking at the things underneath the tip of the iceberg.
mm.
So a lot of times where I like to get to is what does the sales stage conversion rates look like? Because that's an underlying indicator of whether we're starting to make progress.
I see. I see. Some very interesting kind of points that you made specifically around that. And the world of sales is obviously changing quite a lot. The kind of A/B testing for an SDR, the work that an SDR that can be doing is changing as AI comes in and automates a lot of the functions there. How do you kind of see AI as reimagining the go-to-market function and changing the landscape of how sellers operate in?
That's a great question, and there's so many ways I could go with that. I'll start with the one that I'm really excited about, and then I'm start to be more specific and get to some examples with SDRs. Not because all sales leaders are have SDRs their top priority, but pipeline is usually a top three priority, and so that's why I'll go into mentioning SDRs. So I think one of the big promises of AI that I see right now is that it allows companies to take all that data in disconnected silos and bring it together. So now you can take your sales data, your marketing data, your product management data, your customer success data, and you can bring that all into, we'll just call it an AI layer, agentic layer, and you
Mm,
can start to answer questions of who are my who are my reps that are doing scoring really well on discovery calls. Even more
mm,
interesting question, what are the top three variables based on the last 6 months of calls and data? What are the top three variables that are associated with accounts that we win?
mm,
One account they found out through that. We know intuitively that customers that buy start to engage with us more towards the end. They were able to go through and find out that if somebody was in a later stage, we'll say a stage 4 or higher, and we hadn't had contact with them within a week, the probability of that deal closing went down 20%.
mm.
They also can answer the question, why do we lose? Where do we lose? What are the top three variables associated with that? By bringing all that data together, it also, I'm thinking of one company that I've been talking to for a while. They're able to answer what is the customer sentiment and input on our main product line? What is the input that we've gleaned from 6 months of conversations around what we think are the top three features?
Mm,
What should we be developing going forward?
mm,
You can't answer that when you bring all that data together. And then
yeah.
in the world of churn, the holy grail question of what accounts are most likely to churn. How early can we get the right signals to determine that so that we're starting our engagement cadence 6 to 9 months in advance, which we ought to be doing anyway,
Mm,
and instead of it's 1 month away and let's get the crisis management team together and try to convince them to renew. Those are all questions at the macro level. I want to go into a specific thought or two around SDRs, but I want to take a breath for a minute um,
Yeah.
and see if you have any questions. What comes up when I'm saying that?
Yeah, would love to dive into SDR piece here, but I think what you say here is brilliant because I think it's something that comes out a lot of Silicon Valley and Jack Dorsey talks about creating this company intelligence layer, which is I guess a repository of all the information, transcripts from calls, emails, Slack messages between customers. Every customer interaction should be tracked in one centralized location, and then have that as something that you're able to query is something very interesting. So, do you think that, I mean, there's so much talk around different tools and different technologies, but ultimately, like all those things are quite interchangeable. Do you think that the ultimate moat for companies then becomes that intelligence layer, that understanding of their customer?
I do. I think the moat sort of becomes the context because only you have those engagements, only you have that data on all the different types of conversations and engagements that you've had. And so everybody may have access to the same tool or service that helps build that intelligence layer, but they're all different. My 6 month of conversations and what the signals are going to tell me if I do the analysis is going to be different from my company than from your company. And if
Yeah.
I'm doing that in my market segment and my competitors aren't and they don't have that context, how powerful is the competitive advantage that I have? And to be specific, I have one company I worked with, sales manager there had a team of 6 people, and they were performing overall as a team at 15% of quota. Imagine 15% of quota, ouch. And they implemented an intelligence layer. They built it themselves. There was a sales manager there that did a lot of work. And they now have a team of 3 people that is performing at
Wow.
110% of quota and doing more revenue than the 6 sellers combined.
Wow.
And oh, by the way, those 3 sellers, 2 of them were SDRs 6 months ago.
Wow.
That's how quickly they were able to get them up and make them really smart on the context of their customers. They knew the accounts, they knew the personas, they knew the messaging, and they had a lot of flags that told them how to execute. And the sellers, the managers, and the sales leaders on a weekly basis would get an overview of the seller's skills, as well as an overview of deal health and specific recommendations for skill improvement and what they needed to do on their key deals.
So how does a company go about, and we'll go into the SDR piece in a minute, because I know you had something to say about that. How does a company go about building this context within an organization? Because it is vital, and that example you just shared is critical as to how those insights can enable a sales team to focus after the key accounts. But yeah, the question remains, how do you actually go out and build this?
First, be clear on your strategy. I'm not saying you have to have a 2 year AI strategy set up, Ben. I'm saying you do have to have a strategy for how are we going to set this up, who's going to own it. I find that's really critical. I just worked with a company where they have some great AI tools that they brought in, and it's becoming a mess because they don't have an owner.
Mm,
After you got the strategy, you decide who's going to own it. You need to be real clear on what are the business problems that we're going to prioritize first. There's a company in the scale portfolio. That's what they did 18 months ago. Said, here's our initial strategy. And they spent like 2 days mapping out all the use cases and prioritized their top 3 use cases and
mm,
said, we're going to do these. There's also the issue of data cleanliness. I'm not going to pretend to be a data quality expert or a data governance expert. I do believe that AE just amplifies slop,
mm,
as you read every day in LinkedIn. So the reality is we aren't going to get our data perfect.
mm.
However, we should have an idea of what works, what business problems we want to solve, and then we can use that to scale and also decide where we think AI can help us more effectively solve the business problem.
I see. I see. Robert, going into the SDR piece now, what is that thing that you wanted to share about the role of SDRs and how AI is impacting their position?
Well, the I wanted to point out a couple of trends, and I wanted to start with the number one thing that I see with teams helping drive pipeline that are being really effective is that they're stacking signals. There's a lot of noise around signals, and I've been approached probably by 20 different vendors that all want to sell me something according to signals. So it can get real easy to start implementing one-offs. But the companies that are doing really well are able to stack signals. In other words, they're able to say, if we see these three or four things, that is a tier one prospect that we should be reaching out to immediately. And it's not just based on inbound things like they looked at our website. It's like they looked at their website, they fit in the ICP, and they had more than one person in their accounting and finance department reach out.
Hmm.
That's the strong signal. So it's not just one, it's a couple of stacked signals where they've done the regression analysis, if you will, to determine what has the highest probability of converting.
Yeah. We have a lot of thought about signals because yes, on the one hand, I think they're great, but if you think about a total addressable market, let's say you're going after enterprise and there's like 1,000 prospects within your market. If you only relied on signals, you would run out of leads very, very quickly. So how do you balance kind of using signals, but also having enough leads to reach out to in the first place? What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are I'm going to be a little bit of a broken record on this. Um, Ben, is go back to product market fit in the ICP, because a lot of companies, they're a lot of signals got really heavy. I think Sixth Sense did a great job of promoting signals. However, a lot of signals revolved around inbound. And what I'm always worried about is those accounts that we should be engaging that don't show up on our radar. And that only
Mm.
comes if you do the work of the ICP.
Mm. So do you think it's around, so signals are relative, it's almost like painting the leaves of a dying tree green if you haven't got the ICP right. And also we think about the offer as well. What is the offer that you're taking to market and the ICP as well?
Yes, so not there are going to be some leaves on that tree that we haven't seen if we're only considering the signals. And so we have those accounts that have come inbound that are in the ICP.
Mm.
Absolutely, approach priority one. 1B, however, is those accounts that are on the ICP that have not reached out to us. And I'll give you an example. I was just
Or haven't shown a signal, right?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. Yes, absolutely. That they haven't shown a signal. They haven't shown any activity, and yet we've done a good job of building the ICP, and they firmly fit in the ICP. That's where we want to take our high cost resources and proactively target them with relevant messages to the right personas. I had a healthcare company I was working with recently, and I asked the sellers how many accounts they had. Typical answer was 1,100, 1,200 accounts.
Wow. Per seller.
Yeah, and it was the opposite problem. They have way more accounts than might be in the ICP. And I asked them, how do you prioritize your day? And out of six sellers, I got four different answers. They
Mm.
really don't have any priority mechanism. So if we have the ICP and we have the ICP scoring, I really want them focused on those top 20 accounts every month, every quarter.
Mm. I see. Some, yeah, interesting points there about, yeah, building AI native lead generation systems, and I think signals do come into play, but I think there's a lot of noise sometimes. And if you have a very good ICP and a very good offer, is what we've seen, you can have very generic copy, but if the offer is incredible and it's targeted to the right person, that's going to outperform, a bunch of signals which may or may not mean anything.
Yes, yes.
Robert, we sort of reaching the end of this podcast here today. Would love for you to kind of share one insight around if a founder of a startup in your sweet spot between 1 to kind of 50 million is looking at bringing on board a fractional CRO such as yourself. What is the one question that they should be thinking about if they really need your services or not?
How am I going to get there? I can give you more than one question. I'm going to cheat, Ben. How am I going to get there? And then the question that I'd ask is, do you need an advisor or do you need help also getting it done? Because I'm I'm both an advisor and an operator. And what I've seen in my work with VC companies, a lot of portfolios we can give the best advice in the world to a new founder to, but they don't have the arms and legs and the bandwidth a lot of time to do much with that advice. And I think that's the big myth out there. So when I say, do you want an advisor or an operator or both? What I'm really saying is, all right, if you get advice and a strategy that you really trust and you believe in, how then is it going to be implemented? And what I've done, and the reason why a couple of companies have brought me on as a fractional resource, either as a temporary sales leader or to run sales enablement for a short period of time or get that function up and running, is I've been both because they didn't have the bandwidth to do it. So we parachuted me in as the Green Beret behind enemy lines, as it were, to go get stuff done and make the mission happen.
Fantastic. And Robert, if we want to hear more about the type of work that you're doing and want to hear more about your approach generally, where can we learn more about you?
Best place right now is on LinkedIn. It's Robert Koehler. It's Koehler. Approach me on LinkedIn. You'll see my services there. Redoing the website right now and rebranding, and you'll be able to see that shortly.
Fantastic. Well, Robert, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure and look forward to connecting with you very soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been a pleasure as well.
Thanks, Robert.